right foot.
Yes.
Oh, these are longer than my usual ones.
I'm already sweating. You were far more athletic with putting on your socks. All right, guys. Hey, what's up? It's me, Andres, and tonight I'm here with my buddy, Vinny Grace.
What's up?
He's an awesome rider here in Whistler and one of my closest riding friends, and we're going to explain all of the ins and outs of what you want to think about when buying a pair of snowboard boots. There's a lot of misconceptions in the world of snowboarding about how you should fit your boots. So tonight we're here to talk about how to buy a pair of boots, what you should look for, why it's important that you should probably come in, try your boots on before purchasing them at a local shop instead of buying them online. You ever bought a pair of boots online before, Vinny?
Nope.
It's a bad idea buying boots online because you have no idea how they're going to fit. It's like buying a car without test driving it first. You always want to come into a shop and try on at least 3 or 4 pairs of boots to see how they compare and contrast. Is buying boots online a good idea?
Terrible idea.
It's a terrible idea unless you're willing to buy boots, try them on, send them back, buy more boots, send them back, or buy 3 boots at once, I guess, and send 2 of them back. You know, a lot of people, they come into me and they're all concerned about what their setup is going to be, and the last thing that they've thought about is boots. They're sitting here and they're super excited about what board they're going to buy, what bindings they're going to get, and then they're like, oh yeah, you know what, man, I'll just get my uncle's roommate's old boots. You know, I tried them on, they fit, and those will be fine for me. And I'm like, do they fit? You definitely want to make sure that you're buying boots that are going to work with the setup that you end up purchasing. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
No.
totally.
All right.
No, it does, because stiff, soft.
Yeah, cool. Let's get started. All right, guys, so the first thing that you're going to want to think about when you're trying on snowboard boots is making sure that you're wearing the correct sock. In this case, we're both using a Descent compression sock. It's a GFX medical grade compression sock, and they're the best for wearing brand new boots because they're going to hold your foot nice and tight, keeping your foot in its utmost taut shape. Your foot doesn't really have the opportunity to swell or to get bigger over the day of riding when you're wearing something that keeps them tight and taut and in place. They really allow you to try on the boot in its most snug and tight fit. When you have a nice performance-based ski or snowboard sock on, you're not worried too much about the sock bunching up or getting rubbing zones or rubbing points or friction points in the boot. And it works very much like Under Armour works. When the body experiences that cling or that pressure or that slight tension, the body naturally will send more blood to your feet just to compensate for the cling that it's experiencing. Or part of that is what's stopping the foot from swelling as well when you're wearing a compression sock. Vinny, do you wear compression socks in your regular snowboarding attire?
Always. Nothing but.
Awesome, me too. It also makes sure that I don't get any rubbing or grinding or chafing inside of the boot. Chafing inside of the boot sucks. So a lot of the time people come into me and they're like, oh, you know, I've got this problem. My foot really hurts on the heel or on the forefoot. And it ends up being not an actual boot fit problem, but a sock problem where their sock is bunched in that area and it's causing a sweaty, grinding mess. Anyway, on to boot fitting. All right, guys, so now we're going to be trying on some brand new boots. They just came in, hot off the presses. I've got the Solomon Lo-Fi in my hands. Vinny, what do you have?
What do I have?
You have the Solomon Dialogue Wide.
Solomon, okay, we can reshoot
in
that
BOA. Yeah, we'll edit it from here. These are actually the boots that I wore last season. Really impressed by this boot. I think it's a great medium flex. I still enjoy having a lace-up overall profile, and then there's a side boa on the side to sort of help lock in the ankle and grip down on my heel. Cool. Let's take these things apart. Okay, so footbed, liner,
we're actually okay.
and shell.
Let's see.
All right, guys, so the first thing I wanted to talk about after the importance of a proper sock is the terminology of the boot. This is the exterior shell of the snowboard boot. And typically you'll see with any snowboard boot there's an inner liner, and the inner liner is typically separate from the exterior shell. The inner liner is what's giving you the comfort, the performance, the tight fit. And then the exterior shell is what's giving you the waterproofing, the durability, and the overall stiffness or firmness of the boot. In this particular case, Salomon is using a urethane high back on their boot, which is designed to retain the overall flex of the boot throughout its lifetime. The number one thing that you'll hear about a snowboard boot over 50, 60 days of riding is that they will sometimes lose their flex. You can imagine when you're flexing into this thing hundreds of times, thousands of times, riding day after day, the boot can lose its overall rigidity. So with the spine here being a plastic urethane, it allows the boot to maintain its overall flex and rigidity for a longer period of time, therefore making it feel like the boot doesn't get softer after day 30 or 40. So I really enjoy this technology that's in the Salomon boot. It's called mutation technology. But yeah, the overall shell of the boot is what's going to give you durability, it's what's going to give you waterproofing, and it's what's going to provide the overall stiffness and performance of the boot. And then the other thing to look at is the tread of the boot. When you're checking out the different treads of different boots, sometimes they're made from a really lightweight foam, other times there's a much heavier tread for backcountry hiking, and so every boot can be slightly different depending on what the goal of the boot is. I like a boot that's a little bit closer to the ground, and therefore you get better board feel. This guy here is sort of a nice in-between. I would say that it allows you a lot of board feel, but at the same time, there's a good amount of dampening as well, and a good amount of traction, you know? That way you're not slipping around when you're going on a hike, especially if that's an icy hike or a rocky hike. So the next thing you want to think about is the lacing system. Go with the lacing system that ends up fitting your foot the best. You know, if it ends up being that a Burton Speed Zone system is the best for your foot, put up with the Speed Zone system, or if it ends up being that a dual BOA system is the best for your foot, then put up with a BOA system.
Hold up, I think that's going to be confusing. What you're trying to say is like, pick the boot based on the fit,
Yes.
and whatever lacing system happens to be on the boot.
This is why you're here.
You're welcome.
This is why you're here. There's various different tightening systems. What I've got in my hands here is a regular lace-up boot with a BOA system on the side, and this BOA system is designed to just lock in your ankle or your heel at a 45-degree angle, versus other boots will use a pull cord system, or, in the case of Vinny's here, a dual BOA system. When choosing a boot, I typically tell people not to think too hard about what enclosure system it has. I tell people you want to purchase your boots based off of the fit. The fit is the most important thing. So when you go to a shop, try 3 or 4 different boots on and go by what fit ends up being the most accurate and being the most comfortable. You know, people sometimes come into me and they're all caught up in what kind of lacing system. Sometimes people tell me they really want to get a dual BOA, or they're really excited about a pull cord system. I always try to tell them to hold up a minute, let's try a few boots on, and let's make the decision ultimately based off of what the boot feels like inside. Really, the enclosure system is something that you should think about secondarily to the actual fit of the boot first and foremost. Hey Vinny, in your boots, what kind of enclosure system do you use?
I've got a pull cord system, so the Burton Speed Lace.
Nice. Yeah, I like the Burton Speed Zone system myself, and I think that it works really well.
Yeah, I like it. Really quick to lace up.
Yeah, with the New England cords and New England rope. It's very regular that at the beginning of a boot, you're going to want to do up the top portion tighter than you will the bottom portion. If you especially have a wide foot, I tend to do up the bottom portion less and do up the top portion a little bit tighter just to lock everything in, because that's where you're going to generate the flex of the boot. The firmer that you can get this thing up here, the firmer it will feel when you're actually flexing into it. So I always will recommend a dual BOA boot if you're going the BOA route. Apparently this boot's a lot lighter this year.
Oh, it doesn't have a liner in it.
No, I know, but just in general,
Oh, right.
it's apparently lighter, yeah.
I've never thought about how light a boot is.
Yeah, me neither.
Neither with a board.
Well, I've thought about how light boots are, but there's sort of a discussion about lightweightedness versus durability.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, carbon, then you get like both. That's the kind of ideal.
Alright guys, so the next thing that I look at is the inside liner of the snowboard boot. This is a part that a lot of people miss out on. You know, they come in, they try on the boot, they look at what the boot looks like from its exterior, and they never really look at the heart of the boot. So I always encourage people, if you have the chance, take the liner out of the boot, take a look at it to see how it's built, how it's made. You'll see in a much cheaper snowboard boot, the liner literally looks like a tube. And although a tube can feel comfortable because it's not precise, it definitely can blow out and expand and therefore leave you with a boot that is not actually dynamically fitting your foot. So when I look at a boot like this, you know, you're looking at Salomon's R&D from 50 plus years of making snow sport accessories and snow sport shoes. This is a really nice high-end liner. The first things that I call out on it is that it's a fully 3D molded liner. You can see that there's indentations here around the ankle portion so that it's actually shaped to fit to the contours of the human foot. This gives the boot an overall better accurate fit and a more ergonomical fit when you put your foot in. You can also see that Salomon they've specifically stitched certain zones so that you're less likely to have rub or pressure spots. So the whole forefoot, or the whole front of the foot here, is a separate stitching than the top of the foot, and this allows your toes to sort of mold into this mid body of the toe box. You can also see here on the front of the liner, there's sort of an exoskeleton built into the retaining lace system. Some boots don't actually have this inner liner retention system, but I think that you really want to have that inner liner retention system because it keeps everything together, and there's nothing worse than having the inner tongue not sit, you know, nice and symmetrical or nice and centered on your shin. When it comes to snowboard liners, I definitely feel like Salomon makes an awesome snowboard liner. Like I said before, it's based off of all of the research and development of 50 plus years of snow sport liners. So even before they were making snowboard boots, they were making ski boots, and in my opinion, they make one of the best liners in the industry. The third thing that we look at when we're looking at a snowboard boot is what the footbed looks like. So in this particular model, we've got an ortholite footbed, which is a nice dense foam footbed designed for comfort and designed for shock absorption. Depending on the brand, you'll see different types of footbeds. I always like to see a footbed that has at least some material to it. You know, you'll pull out certain brands and it's paper thin and it's designed to just sort of be thrown out and put in your own orthotic, you know what I mean? Do you use a separate orthotic, Vinny?
Yeah, I use custom molded ones.
Ooh, Vinny uses a custom footbed. Tom made your footbeds. Ooh, they must be fantastic.
Oh, so good. But it's because I've got the wide foot.
Right. This guy here is definitely what I would consider more of a comfort footbed. You can see that there's a lot of foam here in the front, and that foam is going to do two things when you're trying the boot on. One, the foam is going to indentate to your foot, creating a customized mold. The other thing that this does is, because it's got 3/4 of a centimeter of foam, it creates a dampening platform that's going to absorb shock vibrations and make the boot just feel nice and cushy and comfortable overall. Alright, so we're going to put these boots back together, we're going to try them on, we're going to see how they fit, and we're going to go through some of the things that you should feel when you're trying on snowboard boots. Ready, Vinny?
Ready.
Cool.
You said ergonomical earlier. That was very funny.
Ergonomical?
Yeah.
That's not a word?
No. Ergonomic.
Ergonomical is a word.
It's not. Why would you have ergonomical and an ergonomic? They both do the same thing.
Because ergonomic is one thing and ergonomical is, it's like comedic and comedical.
Comical.
So guys, one of the first things is we just put our feet in the boots, and we haven't even done them up yet, but one of the things that I always tell a customer is make sure that before you judge the boot, before you really gauge how it feels, you're going to want to make sure that it's done up and that we're standing up and that we're leaning forward in snowboarding position. The first thing that a lot of people will feel when they put their foot into the boot is that it's too tight. Their toes feel like they're on the end, or they feel like they're squished, and I'll say, hold on a second, let's get the boot snug, let's get the boot tightened up, and then we can gauge how it really feels once we're standing up and we're leaning forward in snowboarding position. We're not buying these snowboard boots to relax and hang out in a relaxed position on an easy boy Is that what they're called? Easy boys?
Lazy boys.
Lazy. We're not sitting back on a lazy boy, relaxing, you know, hanging out, having a beer. We're buying these boots for snowboarding, and when we're snowboarding, we're going to be in snowboarding position. I think it was hilarious. I saw this thing. It was like Lil Wayne at a basketball game, and he was wearing full-blown snowboard boots because he thought that they looked gangster and oversized. You know, that's one of those things, you don't want to have that misconception. Try the boots on, and before you do any kind of judging, get them snug first and lean forward in them the way that they would be when you're snowboarding. Without further ado, we're going to get these things snug and tight. Alright guys, so as you can see, Vinny's done a lot quicker than I am. I've still got a traditional lace-up here, but I actually prefer the way that a regular lace-up feels. It reminds me of doing up my hockey skates back in the day. Alright, so this part will be sped up.
Oh, I'm looking real bored. Ready yet?
Alright guys, one of the major tips that I have for lacing up a traditional lace-up snowboard boot is when you've got all kinds of excess line here, I actually like to take it around the back of the boot, and what it does is it actually acts as a little bit of a power strap. So my process is take the line, give it a double knot there, or a double crossover, and then bring it around the back, also giving it a crossover around the back, and that way you can get it nice and snug there. You're not losing any of the tightness. Bring it around back through the front, another double over, which ensures that the cord doesn't move or that the laces don't move around too much. And then I always go for a double knot at the end as well, just to make sure that it doesn't loosen off over the day. Then you can see on the side here, boa wheel to grip down at a 45-degree angle, retaining your ankle pocket in nice and snug. All right, let's flex these suckers. All right guys, so one of the things that I always mention when we're trying on snowboard boots is trying to, at first, accurately measure the length of your foot. Use a measurement Brannikin to figure out what the length of your foot is. Here in the store, we use a Solomon specific one, and this one's great because it not only measures the length of your foot, but it also measures the width of your foot, and it gives us different measurement terminologies. So you can see it allows for not only US sizing, but UK sizing, and most importantly, Mondo point sizing. Mondo point sizing is actually the most accurate because it gives you a mathematical unit of measurement. So Mondo point is actually in centimeterage. So when you're looking at a snowboard boot box, for example, you'll see here on the box, it's giving us multiple different measurements. It's giving us not only the USA size, which is what most people are going to use, but it's also giving us a centimeterage. So in Mondo point, this is a 28 centimeter boot. And this is a good way of starting out the process of a boot fit. You know, it gives you sort of the starting point for where you're going to want to start trying on boots. But the thing that I always try to drive home, guys, is that you just want to use the Brannikin as a starting point. You just want to use your measurements as a starting point. Really, at that point, or after that point, it's up to you to try on the boot and see how it fits. Don't let a sales associate try to tell you that you're specifically a 7 or an 8 and that's what you have to be in. Every single brand fits differently. A Burton fits differently to a Solomon fits differently to a 32 boot, and every brand can have a slight variation of how they do their measurement system. So you want to use this as a starting point and then try the boots on and go from there. It's oftentimes that I get somebody into a boot and they can either go a little bit tighter or maybe they need to go a little bit longer depending on how they feel once they get the boots on and once they're in that forward lean position. All right guys, so now we are in the boots, and to gauge them properly, we're going to get into snowboarding position and we're going to lean forward so that we can really actually feel the way that the boots are going to feel when we're in that athletic position, when we're on the hill. I like to get my knees shoulder width apart, maybe just slightly wider than shoulder width apart. What about you, Vinny? What's your stance like?
Outside the shoulders.
Yeah. And then once I'm in that position, we drive our knees over our toes. That's the position I want people to get into when they're trying on and when they're gauging a boot. So you can see here, we've both got our knees driven over our toes. This is the way that we're going to feel when we're engaging the toe edge of the board. And in this position, there's 4 criteria that I'm really looking to hit.
What's the first criteria, Andreas?
All right, Vinny, the first thing that I think about when I'm trying on boots is where my toes are. I want to feel in the boot right now that I can feel the end of my big toe touching the end of the boot. I don't want my toes crunched on the end, I don't want my toes curling on the end, but I definitely want the sensation that they're at the end and that I can feel the end of the boot. The reason behind this is that over time, as the boot breaks in, they're only going to get bigger. This is the tightest they will ever feel right here, right now in the store. And so if I can't feel the end of the boot, it means that as the boot gets bigger and packs out, I'll have way too much space. So the first step is making sure that we can feel our toes on the end of the boot. That way we know that it's not going to break out and become too big. So Vinny, can you feel your toes on the end of the boot?
Yeah, definitely. If I'm standing up straight, I can feel them pushing up against the top front of the boot. And if I bend my knees, I can feel them come back just a tiny bit, and then it's comfy.
Perfect. Yeah, guys, like Vinny said, you're going to want to lean forward in and you're going to feel your toes come off just slightly when the heel draws into the back of the boot when you're in a forward lean position. All right, guys, so the second thing that you want to think about when you're trying on snowboard boots is the width of the boot. You want to make sure that your foot feels like it's firmly supported, almost like someone's giving you a firm handshake over the top of your foot. I don't want your foot to be pinching and creating a overhang or an over bunching of your toes, nor do I want it to feel like this where, you know, your whole foot profile is pressing in. And at the same time, I also don't want it to fit too big. I don't want your feet to feel like they've got side to side movement like this. If they move back and forth like this in the boot's only going to become too big over time. So it should feel nice and firm, holding your foot, but at the same time, not cramping your foot and not applying so much pressure that you're going to lose circulation. One of the important things that I tell people to do when you're trying on a snowboard boot is once you've got it on, once it's tight, just hang out in the boots for maybe 5 to 10 minutes to see if your feet start to lose circulation or not. Once you're in the boot for 5 to 10 minutes, you'll start to get an idea of whether or not that boot's feeling good or bad. You know, sometimes I'm in a boot and it only takes 5 to 10 minutes. The boot starts to feel a lot better than just stock out of the box because now the heat of my feet are interacting with the liner and that's causing sort of a little bit of an indentation, a little bit more of the boot starting to give in to my foot so it feels more comfortable. Versus at the same time, if you've got your foot in there for 10 minutes and you know you're getting that pins and needles feeling, if your feet start to go numb, that's typically indicative of the boot being too tight. So make sure when you're trying on the boot, you stand in those boots for maybe 5 to 10 minutes just to see how your foot starts to settle in that boot. You don't want numbness, and at the same time, you don't want the boots to feel like they're slopping around too much. All right, so the third thing that I think about when I'm trying on snowboard boots is making sure that my heel or my ankle feels like it's locked into position. When I get into snowboarding position here, I want to drive my knees over my toes the way that I would when I'm engaging my toe edge, leaning into a toe turn. Drive down like so, and what I want to think about is, are my heels moving around too much? I want them to feel solid in place. I want them to feel like they've got support. I want the overall fit of the boot to feel like it's dynamically holding my heel down into position. Technically, if I try to lift my heel, if I go like this and try to lift my heel, in most boots, if you're pressing upwards and trying to lift your heel, you'll be able to slightly. You know, even when I do this, I can get my heel maybe to lift half a centimeter to a centimeter. But that's not how we're ever going to be snowboarding. So when I'm gauging the boots, I'm thinking about them in snowboarding position. When I drive down hard like this into a turn, do my heels move around too much? And if they're accurately fit, they shouldn't. They should stay down, they should feel locked and stable and supported. All right, the fourth and final thing that I'm thinking about when I'm trying on snowboard boots is making sure that the tongue of the boot is nice and close to my overall shin. If there's any kind of gap room in between the tongue and the shin, then you're going to end up with all kinds of pressure zones, chafing, rubbing, and eventually shin bang. You can imagine that if your shin is banging into the front of that boot thousands of times, even though it may not hurt the first time, it will hurt over hundreds of times where your shin is banging in. So when you're trying on the boots, you want to make sure that there's not too much gap space in between your shin and your tongue. You can see here that when I'm leaning forward into the boot, my shin is making constant contact with the tongue of the boot, which is a good thing. But if I had a ton of space here, if the boot was sitting like this on me, and if I was leaning forward and there wasn't contact, that would be indicative of the boot feeling too big overall. So in this case, it's a good fit. You can see that the tongue of the boot stays on my shin as I flex forward into it.
So Andres, what do you think about heat molding?
Well, heat molding's quite the topic of conversation when purchasing some snowboard boots, Vinny. And a lot of people will ask me, should I heat mold? Shouldn't I heat mold? When should I heat mold? And is it worth doing? The process of heat molding is essentially taking the inner liners of the boots, putting them on a fan-based heater, and getting them piping hot. When the liner is piping hot, it then becomes more malleable and soft. When you put your foot in, it creates an indentation or a customization mold of your foot into the liner, which helps the boots feel more comfortable overall just on day one when you're getting out there to ride. So my thoughts on heat molding are, if you're the weekend warrior who's only gonna snowboard maybe 5 to 10 times a season, it's definitely worth it to mold your boots. Heat molding helps to start that indentation process, giving a customized mold to the to the
Customized fit.
Heat molding with heat molding your boots will start to create an indentation in your liner that then customizes the boot to the shape of your foot. However, if you're someone like myself who rides 50 plus times a season, you probably just want to let your boots mold to your feet through the natural wear and tear process. Heat molding does nothing that natural wear and tear won't do over time. So the natural heat of your foot, the natural pressure of your feet moving around in the boots, and the sweat of your foot will break the boot down over time, creating that customization regardless of whether or not you have them heat molded off the bat. It's also important to note that you may not need to ever have your boots heat molded if the boot feels extremely accurate just off the bat. Typically, we'll encourage people to heat mold if they're feeling that they've got a pressure zone or there's a slight rubbing or conflict area in the fit. If you're in the store and you're 80% there, you feel like the majority of the boot feels good, but there's maybe just a slight hindrance or a slight tight point, you can have the boots heat molded, and that will sort of relieve that pressure and make the boot feel a little bit less tight right off the bat. However, if the boots feel great and there's no major pressure spots or no major, bite zones, then you don't necessarily need to have the boots heat molded. They will mold on their own naturally with time, with heat, with the sweat of your foot, and with the pressure that you're putting into the boots. So guys, another thing to mention, if you're gonna heat mold your boots, you wanna make sure that you're doing it in an aggressive position. So you want the boots to mold into that athletic, aggressive position, the way that you would be when you're snowboarding. So when you're having your boots heat molded in the store, make sure that you're standing, leaning forward, driving your knees over your toes, typically for about 10 minutes. Most heat molds are about 10 minutes. One of the final things that I want to talk about is footbeds. Do you need a footbed? Should you wear a footbed with your boots? Is it worth getting a custom footbed orthotic put into your boots? It's a big topic of conversation, and there's a lot of different mentalities on whether or not you should. My buddy Vinny here has custom footbeds.
Oh, well, so I need the custom footbeds.
Yeah.
Because I have really flat feet, so they sink down flat, they get really wide. That hurts because they push against the outside of the boots. So I
Right.
got some custom molded ones that pull them up into a really tall position because my muscles can't do that. And then I can ride all day, every day.
Nice. So it keeps your foot in like that most upright, athletic position, almost what it would feel like when it's non-weighted.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. And that keeps your feet nice and stable. And the other thing that that does is like when your feet are aligned, then the rest of your body is aligned too.
Yeah,
So it's
knees,
like,
hips.
yeah, exactly. If your knees and your hips are aligned with your overall feet and the arches in your feet, then you get better stability and better balance, I would say.
Yeah.
It's always been a hard call because some people need orthotics. You know, they're the kind of people that will wear a doctor orthotic even in their regular shoes. So if you're that kind of person, then definitely I recommend even bringing in your own orthotics from your regular shoes and trying them on with your snowboard boots, because a proper orthotic will actually make your foot smaller. It brings your foot up and therefore will displace some of the width that would otherwise happen when your foot pronates forward. However, having said that, if you're somebody who has a fairly healthy arch, or if your arch doesn't have a lot of movement, if your arch doesn't pronate too much, then you may not need arch support. Buy the boots and try them stock first. See if you have any burning under the balls of your feet, see if you have any burning or aching under your arches, and you can always add in an aftermarket footbed later. Something like this here is the example of an aftermarket footbed. This is a Superfoot. As you can see, it's actually fairly worn. I use these in my normal shoes because it gives me just better support here in the arch of my foot. This is something that, you know, you'll see often added to a snowboard boot, and when you're here trying stuff on, we can actually take this and put it in there for you, see if you like the way that it feels just while you're trying on the boots. So another important thing to think about when you're trying on snowboard boots is just how flexible they are. You can imagine softer flexing boots are typically more forgiving and will give you a bigger range of motion for when you're landing something, especially if you land something not as accurately. With a softer boot, you can imagine that you get way more range of motion forwards, the boot is more forgiving, and therefore if you're somebody who's landing a trick and maybe you don't have your accuracy down yet, you can still sort of finagle your way out of that landing to make it work, make it happen. You have a little bit more range of motion, therefore it feels a little bit more forgiving. Versus if you were looking at a really stiff boot or a really firm boot, a firm boot is really good for that person who wants high speed accuracy, who wants a lot of power. You can imagine if you're going 100 miles an hour, you don't want a ton of flex in your boots. You want that boot to feel fairly firm so that when you move, the boots move and the board moves, and it's all an integrated process. With a stiffer overall boot, you're going to find that that boot holds up its speed, it feels stable, it feels nice and supported, and it's going to be more aggressive. Versus with a softer flexing boot, you got more range of motion, it feels more forgiving, it's less demanding, and you have a little bit more of an opportunity to, and you have more leeway to sort of make that landing happen or make that trick happen if you didn't do it accurately. These particular boots in the Salomon Lo-Fi are a medium flex boot, so good for everything. You know, I will typically tell people the best kind of boots for here in Whistler are a mid-range flex, so that you still have a considerable amount of, you know, forgiveness and lean into the boot, but it'll hold stable when you're carving hard, when you're going faster. So I typically tell people, get a mid-range boot. You still want something that has that, you know, flex when you're in the trees, when you're in a tighter area. That allows you to get nice and low, and therefore when you're lower over the board, your center of gravity is lower and you feel more balanced. So the next thing we want to tackle after making sure that the boot fits correctly on our feet is make sure that the boot fits correctly into the binding that we're going to use. So whether you have an old binding at home that you want to make sure integrates, or if you're buying brand new bindings, I tell people the next step is to make sure that the boot integrates correctly. So I've got here a brand new set of Salomon holograms, and these should integrate the best to the boot because it's Salomon to Salomon, so it's been designed to work together.
You know what's going to happen though? Shop assistants the world over are going to start hating you because people are going to come in and say, well, Andreas said.
It's true. I should test out my bindings in my boots.
Yeah. You guys in the shop are going to be like, I just want to sell this guy a pair of bindings.
Okay, so you can see here we've got the straps of the boot placed on the boot symmetrically so that there's as much on one end as there is on the other, and therefore everything feels nice and supported. With a good toe cap, you'll see that the toe cap actually wraps around the front end of the boot, applying pressure both on the top and towards the back, which draws your heel back at a 45-degree angle, really locking you into the back of the binding. In this case, we're looking at a Solomon boot to a Solomon binding. This is the Solomon hologram here. So there's a fantastic integration. This boot has been designed to actually fit into a Solomon binding. And Solomon bindings are nice within themselves because they have a malleable heel cup that really actually fits and flexes into the back of the boot nicely, holding the ankle pocket nice and tight. So you want to make sure of a few things. The first thing is that the straps are fitting symmetrically over top of the boot. And then the second thing that you're thinking about is you want to make sure that you don't have an excess amount of overhang in the heel versus the toe. So between the toe and the heel, you should have a similar amount of overhang. You can see in the case of this particular setup, there's maybe about an inch on either end, and therefore the center of the boot is going to line up with the center of the disc, which will give you a nice, even, symmetrical feel when you're carving, leaning back and forth on the board. All right, guys, so the last thing that I want to talk about is that tonight you've just watched me and Vinny try on Solomon boots, and although Solomon boots are great, I always encourage people to try on various pairs of different brands of boots. That way you get a sense for what fits and what doesn't. So when you're trying on snowboard boots, it's always a good idea to try 3 or 4 different brands just to see how your foot settles in the different makes and models. It could be that your foot is more indicatively shaped to a Burton versus a Solomon versus a Ride or a 32 boot, and therefore even though you might come in thinking specifically about buying one brand, it's always good to try on a few different ones just to see how your foot's going to fit in them. This is my secondary boot. It's a Burton SLX, and when I'm not riding my Solomon Lo-Fi, I use this as my backup boot. And if you're someone who's like myself, who rides 100 times a season, I actually think it's a good idea to have a couple of pair of boots, and that way one set can dry out after a full day of riding, and you can use the other set that isn't damp or doesn't have any wetness in it. There's nothing worse than putting on the same pair of boots that you've ridden in all day the day before if they haven't thoroughly been dried, because the sweat from the day before will reactivate in the cold and therefore make your feet freezing. So if you have a problem with, cold temperatures or your feet getting numb, it's a good idea to rotate a couple of pairs of boots. Every brand of snowboard boot fits differently. They all have their own, finesse on how to do it. So it's a good idea to try on 3 or 4 different brands, see how they all fit, see how they compare, because they may have a different mentality in mind of what the boot's designed for. A lot of the time people come in, they're looking for a specific fashion or style or color wave. I'll say to them, yeah man, we can try that boot on, but why don't we try a few different boots on? And they actually go for a different boot just because it fits more indicatively to their foot shape. So always something to think about. I'm going to try on these Burton SLXs now. This is my secondary boot or my backup boot, and we'll compare it to the boot that I just had on. Wow, these go on so easy. Yeah. They're so premium. Alright guys, so now I've got my second pair of boots on, feeling the differences between the Solomon brand and the Burton brand. They both feel great for my foot, but I can definitely feel some slight differences. This guy doesn't have as much of a narrow ankle pocket, but I can still get it nice and tight via the dual speed zone system. That's another thing to mention, is that This particular boot is using a dual speed zone system where you have a pull cord on either side of the boot, one that does the upper portion of the boot and one that does the lower portion of the boot. And this is good so that you can customize the fit, making sure that at the beginning you can get this guy nice and snug up here, which is where you're going to get all of the flex of the boot from. And at the bottom portion of the boot, if you're someone who has a wider foot, you don't need to go as tight off the bat, so it's a little bit more comfortable. And then once the boot packs out, then you can really start to reef down and get them nice and solid. Another really cool thing about this particular boot is the Vibram sole that's going to A, dampen any kind of vibration that's traveling up my leg from impacts, and it's also going to make sure that I have really good hikeability, a lot of good grip when I'm going uphill, and it's not going to slide around too much when I'm on ice. How do I look in them, Vinny?
Steezy.
All right, guys, so thanks for watching. That was my boot fitting seminar video. I hope that I've gone over all of the main topics or main key points of talking when buying boots. I hope it was educational. I hope that there was some stuff to take away from that. What did you think, Vinny? Was it okay?
Yeah, I think we covered everything.
Yeah, I think we covered a great deal of information. I hope it wasn't too boring.
Nah. But if you do have any questions, leave them in the comments below.
Yeah, leave them in the comments or come on in to Comore Whistler. Don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
See you around.
Nice. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, no worries.
Good show. Good show.
Top notch.
Yeah.
Throw
Cool.
them in the comments below.
All right.
Smash that like button.
Like that smash button, and we'll see you in the next video. Cool.